Good evening, everyone. Myself, Tohfatu Rabbi Pial, and I work as a researcher in Center for Governance Studies, CGS, here in Dhaka. And I welcome all of you to this wonderful conversation we will be enjoying throughout. So, the title goes like The Memory and the Amnesia, Why the World Keeps Repeating the Crisis that we have come across. So, like we have come across throughout the history, which actually has been the significant case throughout, that different generations having severe amount of human catastrophes, they just tend to deliver the promise that this will never happen. But what actually happens, the future generations or different decades actually make us to encounter another bunch of human tragedy that we have to encounter upon. So after we had just consumed the traumas of Second World War or the Holocaust, to be more precise, we have had to take the tragedy which has been happening almost a century in Gaza or throughout the Palestine as a region, or we have had to consume the tragedies in Rwanda, former Yugoslavia, and we are all aware of what has been happening in Myanmar and different regions in Middle East as well, including Syria, Yemen, and different other parts in Africa, including Sudan as well. So, as far as this session is concerned, we'll be really exploring the question that how this bunch of conflicts, fatigues, and global distractions actually make the peace really unstable, and what are the memories, to be specific, we can demand from our power. To discuss on these crucial issues considered in this, considered very seriously in this whole world, we have the eminent expertise coming from different parts of the world. So first of all, let me introduce Mr. David Patrician, the moderator of RTL Nord, Germany. Then it's my utmost pleasure to introduce to you all Mr. Mehmet Ozkan, who is right now working as a professor of international relations in the Turkish National University, Turkey. And we have the utmost honor and special privilege to have among with us Mr. Dominique Rakotozafy, coming from Madagascar, and who previously served as the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Defense. And last but not the least, to conduct the whole session, we have among with us Professor Navine Murshid, who is serving as a professor in Political Science Department, North-South University, and I think we all are familiar with her thought-provoking writings and her contribution he kept in our last year's mass uprising. So not making any further ado, hoping to have a very wonderful conversation together. Over to you, madam. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yes, excellent. Thank you for coming into this late evening panel. It's a pleasure to be here. We will be talking about some heart-wrenching issues, so I suppose, hold on tight. What we were planning on doing today is to take advantage of the variety of expertise that we have here on this panel. So we have, as we've just heard, Dominique was defense minister in Madagascar. David is a journalist. Mehmet is a professor of international relations at the Turkish Defense University. And I know it's not the Turkish Defense University. I meant to say that it's
National Defense University, NDU.
NDU, that's right. Where the common theme here is an emphasis on defense and conflict and so on. And I think our panel has been set up quite provocatively, right? To sort of say that, do we always forget? Is it the reason why we have recurrent conflicts or massacres because we forget? What is the role of memory? What is the role of amnesia? Or is it something else? And I think in thinking about this topic, I was thinking also about the history of Bangladesh, how amnesia has been part of the national imaginary here. And in particular, if you think about amnesia in the context of conflicts or famines or natural disasters. We've just had an earthquake 2 days ago, and we know that everyone's talking about it now. It's all over the media. But for how long are we going to talk about it? How long will our attention span stay on earthquakes before we actually do something about it? Or will we, again, quote unquote, forget? Right? We can also think about the 1974 famine, which a lot of people say that, during Sheikh Mujib's time, was sort of pushed away under the ground, and we've forgotten it. Except that we actually didn't forget, right? If we sort of think about the policies that came out in the 80s and 90s, when we think about the focus on food production, on high-yield food production, on food policies, agricultural policies, we see that implicit in many of these policies was the experience of the 1974 famine, right? So even though people didn't necessarily talk about it in terms of oh, look what happened, or, didn't spectacularize it, underlying policies and policymaking was this information, right? The knowledge was already there. So I think I want to suggest that, we don't really forget, right? We might willfully forget, you might choose to forget, we might ignore because it serves our purpose, we might ignore because it serves our strategic interest. And in this world, maybe that is what becomes one of the primary drivers of conflict, that the degree to which we form even friendships and even alliances on the basis of strategy, right? If you're a realist, we never really have friends, only strategic partnerships, right? And these strategic partnerships only last till your strategic interests are served, right? And I think in that sort of lens, we can think about the intermixing of both security interest as well as economic interest, and how these two issues are no longer separate entities or separate levels. These come in together to inform our understanding of geopolitical interest, right? And so with that in mind, with that sort of a prelude, I think I want to turn to our speakers and give us a sense of the work that you do, right? In your own field, how is it that you have come to define conflict? How would you explain the recurrence of conflict? Sure, there's our easy answer, we forget and hence we do. But I think the answer is often a little bit more complicated, right? So and I think this will be interesting because, here we have a sort of government position, here we have a journalistic position, here an academic position. And once we are able to see the variation in which we even understand conflict and realize that we often don't actually think about it in the same ways, maybe we can think about how they are interlinked as we think about maybe peace as something more than just the absence of conflict, right? So maybe we could just go in this order. Dominique, you can get us started. Here, you can take.
Thank you. I'm Dominique from Madagascar, and to start with, let me give you a country profile of Madagascar for you to understand better what I will be talking about. Madagascar is a big island, the third biggest island in the Indian Ocean off the east coast of South Africa. It's almost a small continent. 30 million people. 60% of the population under the age of 30, so very young people. And what we feel as a conflict, we don't experience external factors, but mainly internal. But apart from that, we are prone to natural disasters like cyclones every year, at least 3. And then you have the cattle thieves, people who steal cattle, and then epidemics, and social inequity, and lately misinformation through digitalization. So if I talk about the recent events, in my country there was a Generation Z protest late in September, 25th September. They were complaining about the lack of electricity, running water, no adequate education system, the healthcare system is down, and all of them with corruption, embezzlement of public money, and money laundering. Because of this protest, the army took its responsibility, and the president and government were ousted on the October 14th. So most of the threats back in my country are not traditional threats like defense, but rather economical, social, environmental, and political, especially political because of fraud during elections, corruption, oligarch power, state capture. This is why in 65 years of independence, since 1960, we have had 7 presidents, but only had a normal handover. Every one of them was ousted by protest. So this is recurring conflict. I think that is the characteristics of what's happening in my country. So from then we can discuss about what we can do to solve those problems. Thank you.
This is actually very important because your country is not the only one going through Gen Z protest. You know, we've had ours. I've seen it in Sri Lanka, we've seen it in Nepal, and there are all kinds of speculation about who's next, and the kind of explanations that we see are also very similar, right? Inequality, lack of access to basic needs such as healthcare, such as electricity. So and I think this is useful to also think about how in the post-90s period, or since the Cold War, we've come to also think about conflicts not just as international conflicts between countries, but internal strife or civil conflicts as international conflicts too. So there are no longer that kind of demarcations between the international and domestic spheres. There's this spillover effect that takes us all. David.
Yes, hello. My name is David Patrician. Originally from the United States. I am a journalist now based in Hamburg, Germany. And I was asked very last minute to jump in as a speaker because somebody had to cancel. So I'm happy to be here, although I didn't have much time really to think deeply about this subject. But I will speak from the heart. First of all, when we talk about conflict, looking at it through a journalism perspective, conflict means headlines. In that sense, they say if it's a brutal conflict, if there's something wrong going on, that'll get more media attention. But there's 2 things as a journalist that I find very interesting. Number one, as we all know, with a mobile phone, we're living in a swipe generation. What do I mean by that? Well, these days, especially the Gen Z, the younger people, if they want to get a pizza, they swipe. If in some countries they want to have a date, they swipe. If they see the headlines, they swipe. That's all good. But what I realize is that through this technology, we get so much information that at the same sense, we're not able to process all of that. And so that the memory capacity is very, very small. In the sense that when you talk to someone and I ask them, young people, can you tell me 3 major headlines that happened last week in the world politics? Some of them, they really can't. In the sense that they may have seen that on their screens, they may have seen that on their Instagram posts, but they don't really have a chance to digest it or go through with it. And of course, to go out and get a magazine or a newspaper and go into detail about these things takes a lot of time and energy, which these days some people don't have the chance to do or don't make the effort to do that. That's number one. Another thing what I find concerning is where we as the media, and maybe that also as a society, where we bring our attention to these conflicts. For example, the war in Gaza, there's no question it was horrific. But when we look at the amount of attention that the media, I would speak now from the Western media, I can't say what it was in Bangladesh, easily compared to some of the other atrocities going on, whether that be in Sudan, whether that be in northern Nigeria, and truly a genocide that is going on there with the churches being burnt down, it seems that the media has almost ignored that. And so I think that's also a big challenge as far as in this day, while there are many conflicts, why is it that some of them almost polarize, not only polarize, but monopolize the attention of the media, while others are completely almost ignored and non-existent? That's the other thing. The third thing with conflict, in my own experience, I've done moderation in several areas, and one, of course, with the Arab-Israeli conflict. And, you know, there's something also like algorithms. Looking back at the United States, algorithms really feed you what you believe in. So if you take an example like abortion, and you are pro-abortion, the algorithm understands this is what you believe in, this is what you read, so you keep getting the same information over and over and over again. Well, the consequence is that the other side of that issue, you don't even get the information about anymore, and you can't even process that, so it becomes very one-sided. So I think technology is also playing a very big role as far as our attention span and how much we can remember. Then we get into, of course, artificial intelligence, deep fakes, and all the other things that are skewing our perceptions as to which way conflicts are going. And that's going to be also a big challenge to see what is actual, what is factual, what is opinion compared to what is news facts. So, yeah, I would say as a journalist, conflicts, the first thing, very short-sighted, we go there. Now, after a conflict is finished, why do most media organizations disappear? You would also think that, let's say, you know, inshallah, as you like to say, there is a peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That should also get a lot of media coverage, opinions, editorials. But it seems that as soon as things get a little bit quieter, the media landscape turns to the next disaster. So, unfortunately, conflicts, there's other saying, accidents and problems get high ratings. And of course, baby animals and family stories get lower ratings. That's kind of the way they go.
Right, thank you, David. I think what's instructive in what David has been saying is about pinpointing the spectacularization of violence, right? And chasing what's spectacular, and then thinking about what gets hidden when we are only focusing on what's spectacular, what's sensational, right? And I think that gives us one of the ways to sort of think about why some of these lesser conflicts then persist, right? Why attention is taken away, and why sympathy also becomes selective. Why is it that our sympathies are selective? And I think these are some of the questions that hopefully we'll come back to.
Sure. You know. Especially selective sympathy, that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm from Turkey, so I came from a country where we have lots of conflicts in our neighborhood. You know, from still Syria, although it is resolved relatively, you know, Ukraine in the northern part, instability in Iraq, and recently in the Nagorno-Karabakh in Caucasus. So we have lots of problems in the region. That's why perhaps we get used to have so much problems, so it's so normal for us. When you wake up next day, we have another crisis, so which is normal. For us, I mean, my understanding as well, conflict is like a violent crisis with persistence. You know, if there are lots of crises everywhere, but the conflict is something else that for me that's deeper than crisis, and that has violent dimensions and also persistent. When I look at these things, I mean, I want to outline three things. First, unfortunately, you know, if you look at the global politics, so that's one thing is real, that the global politics or international liberal order has lost its problem-solving capacity. You know, if that is the essence of any order you have, either regional or global, doesn't matter. If they lost the problem-solving capacity, that's over. In last 30 years, I don't remember any conflict that has been resolved. I mean, perhaps the only peace process in Colombia, 2012, 2015. Perhaps peace process in Moro, relatively. But other than that, any crisis or any conflict immediately become local, regional, and international. So that's why we see that. I mean, that's why we discuss the diminishing influence of today's global order. That's the first thing. In second, with regard to conflicts, we always approach the conflicts through through power relations. Most of the countries, when they approach their conflict, they ask what we gain from it, or what we don't gain from it. For example, we have seen that very clearly in Gaza, even the naming of it, that's a clear genocide. Even the naming of it, debating of it, David mentioned in Western media, is different. And now there is another crisis in Venezuela, and nobody's talking about. We don't know. Tomorrow we can wake up and we can see sort of American, I don't know, whether invasion or something else in Venezuela or other crises. So what we do, we approach selectively because of power relations, and that does not increase the importance of the conflict, but that gives a sense how we approach the conflict. For example, also, do you remember 2006-07? There was a Darfur genocide debate everywhere. Save Darfur coalition, and they were discussing, George Clooney, Angelina Jolie, they all went to Darfur and Sudan. Today in Darfur, that's exactly what's happening, but nobody's talking about Sudan. And it was clear 2006-07, because they were talking about, especially through some Save Darfur coalition and others through the United States, they were talking about the Darfur genocide. Why? Because after the Iraqi war, there was no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Then, to divert attention, created a sort of as if there is a genocide for the public consumption. Sometimes we create the conflict, but now when the conflict is happening in real now in Sudan, unfortunately, there is less interest. Also, the third one is how we perceive the conflicts. Sometimes lack of information, sometimes lack of understanding, we underestimate the conflicts. We underestimate their influence, their repercussions. That's why we are late to respond to conflict. We have seen that in 1994 Rwanda genocide, that has been clear. We have seen that in the 1992-1995 in Bosnia, in the war in Bosnia. So when we react late, because we perceive it is less important or little or whatever, then we may end up something bigger. Perhaps in 5 years' time, we will see similar thing in Sudan and different places. So that's the issue, and definition, sometimes no common ground, understanding in globally, and even the definitions, whether, how important that conflict is something different. For example, you may see, for example, Trump is talking about in Nigeria, but you don't see Trump is talking about Sudan so much. Or perhaps the war in Ukraine is important. Yes, it's a war that's very important, but you don't see the other issues get so much attention. Not through Trump also, but other countries. So unfortunately, we look at this crisis, the conflicts as through power relations, and how we perceive is extremely important. And lastly, if the biggest crisis today we have is unfortunately, the global order has lost the problem-solving capacity. The question is, non-Western countries, do we have the capacity to solve the problems? That's the question that is in front of us. I leave it to David.
Thank you, Mehmet. I think this is very useful in not only detailing the hypocrisies, but also to serve as a starting point to think about other possibilities, other imaginaries, if you will. And so maybe we can start there, right? If we think that the global order, maybe we should also clarify individually whether we have a consensus in terms of thinking about whether the global order has indeed lost its conflict resolution capabilities, A. And B, also think about not only that, maybe take this to the next level and be a little bit more provocative, that, durable disorder is the order that the global order puts forward, right? That there is no real interest, not only that there is no interest in maintaining any kind of global order, but the creation of and sustenance of small, maybe manageable disorders is the name of the game from the point of view of Western powers, right? And I think it is in that context also, I think, if we sort of think about a perspective where we imagine, can, the question that you posed, can there be an alternative pathway? Can other countries move out of this traditional way in which we have seen great powers playing, right? That superpowers or great powers playing with other countries, with smaller countries becoming pawns of their greater conflicts, right? Can there be an alternate way forward? Maybe this is our chance to think more provocatively. Maybe go the other way around. Mehmet, do you want to get us started, since this is your question?
So you asked me to answer my question.
That's right. You can't just let us think this. You have to give us a framework.
Yes, I mean, the terminology you used, that cosmos in chaos, that's very attractive, very important. But depend how you define the chaos. If it is a war or something, if it's a deepening conflict, let's say there is happening a genocide. So what? Everything is manageable in the world. Everything is manageable. Like, world has been managing conflict in Palestine for many years, or other conflicts. It has been, apartheid system has been managed over 50 years in South Africa. So everything is manageable. The issue is, are we interested in solving? Because people are suffer, they die. You can say it is through media. It's manageable.
Damage. Yeah.
Yes, they call it collateral damage. Manageable order, that's why sometimes, in that sense, may justify some continuity of some conflicts. That has been happened for many years in many places. So I'm a little bit reluctant to use that terminology. But the non-West, the biggest test for the non-Western countries is the problem-solving capacity. Why I focus on that? That is the test we have. If we are not capable of solving the problems, that means we have nothing to offer on humanity. Same. Everybody, problem solvers are respected in family, in societies. So people will go when they have problem. Today, still, when there is a problem anywhere, whom do you call? You don't call Beijing. You still call Washington, right? Whether Trump answers or not, that's another question. But you call them. Still, they have influence. But you know that there is no guarantee that there will be an answer. There is no guarantee that you won't pay a price if they get answer. This is the issue. In 2010, let me give an history. 2004, in the United Nations General Assembly, when we are talking about Security Council reform, that time, many people had believed that this system could sustain with transformations. As you know, the Kofi Annan's agenda in larger freedom has been debated, but later on it was not accepted. 2000 years until 2009-10, many people, they believed that, especially non-Western countries, they can contribute positively to the existing system. But 2007, 2008, after 2009, they lost trust in the system, existing system. In 2010, there was an agreement that signed between Turkey and Brazil, Tehran Agreement, if you may remember. That time, Prime Minister Erdogan and that time President Lula, they have brokered the agreement in Iran with regard to nuclear issue, 2010. And that agreement was rejected outrightly by Europe and by the United States. Why? I think that was an intervention that two non-Western countries, they were trying to solve a problem. And that time West was very jealous about problem-solving capacity. They rejected. And if you remember, Lula got very angry after that. Lula released the letter that he received from Obama. In the letter it was saying, if, for example, what conditions should be in the agreement so it's acceptable for the United States. And it was exactly the same. What Obama asked, literally. after 2014, when there is Bashar Assad used chemical weapons in Syria, then everybody saw that West did not react, and they continued. And 2015, 16, and the West showed no interest. And later on, in 2022, the fact that West is not interested, I'm talking about overall, is not interested anymore in holding problem-solving capacity. They let it go. That's why 2022 Turkey has initiated with United Nations Black Sea Grain Corridor. And it was supported widely, especially to Africa. Many grains has been sent there. So basically what I'm saying, now there is a test. The West is interested selectively in problem solving, but what does the non-West is doing? They are also acting selectively, unfortunately. So we should be acting more proactively, sometimes in cooperation, in coordination. Then we can gain a trust and sort of contribute positively to new and possibly existing order.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something. So I'm living now in Europe, in Germany, and of course the discussion of the funding for NATO, for example. NATO is there as a defense organization, an alliance, and Trump has made it very clear in the last few months that that America should be stepping back a little bit from that alliance, and that the European countries should be investing more of their GDP, more of their resources to that. Germany, since World War II, has had a very, very small, almost weak military. Even inside of the country, they make jokes about it. But while the methods may not be applauded, within a half a year, all of a sudden, Germany and other European countries have raised their investments into NATO, some up to 3%, some up to 5%, and the results are there. And so when we talk about other countries, even smaller countries, having to step up with conflict resolution, conflict management, it's not something that they should be doing. I think it's something that they have to be doing for their own self-interest, but also in the sense that with regard to the United States, for example, the argument in the US, people forget we have such a large deficit. Of course, we have a lot of domestic issues as well, that there's not much of a taste anymore for this generation of politicians to be as actively involved in many international affairs as before. So as that pullback happens, the Europeans at first were shocked, but after that shock, I think they looked at it as an opportunity to say, you know what, if we really do come together, not only as one country, Germany, where I live in, but the EU with 27 countries and with a population much larger than the United States, about 500 million people, we could really come together and do a unified, maybe even European defense force, conflict resolution matters, and be much more powerful, not only against America, there's a transatlantic relationship, so they have a good friendship there, but in resolving more close geopolitical issues, such as the war going on in Ukraine right now. So while this may be a challenge, I think for certain regions it could be a great opportunity to put more into their defense spending and to put more into their conflict resolution research powers and being.
If I may continue, I talk about another way of seeing it regarding of the case of Madagascar. What can be the other alternative than great power playing that we are facing now? For the case of Madagascar, for example, after independence in 1960, Madagascar was asking the General Assembly to take a resolution on handing over some of the scattered islands that France did not give after independence. There are 5 islands, which gives them an economic exclusive zone of 500,000 square kilometers. So despite of the General Assembly resolution of 1979 saying that France should do something about it, up till now, nothing has been done. It seems like there is a distribution of area of responsibility among the 5 permanent members on the Security Council that didn't allow them to let Madagascar have the rights on its EEZ in this area. And since it's not a constraining resolution, because not taken by the Security Council, Nobody cares about it up till now. 65 years now. And this is part of the heritage of the colonization, because Madagascar is a French colony. And you might have heard of what is called France-Africa policy in all French-speaking former colonies. That's why we have problems in West Africa with those Sahelian countries. This is all the same. So now the problem is because they get hold of the former colonies and with the corrupt government who deal with them with embezzlement, money laundering, and something like this. It's very difficult for now to deal with this. We are still trying to join the Global South movement to balance a little bit this distribution of power in the world. That's what I can talk about this.
These are all very useful ways to sort of start imagining. But I was also thinking about how we might think of a non-defense approach, right? Given that there's no way in the world that smaller countries could ever really compete at the level of defense. We could say that we just increase our defense budget. How much? How feasible is that really? That while we are imagining, I think we need to maybe move away from that old mold of let's arm ourselves up to our teeth in order to be more safe, right? Because that has, as we know, and as we have seen empirically over time, that has led to more conflicts with increased capabilities to take lives indiscriminately without without any kind of recourse to justice oftentimes, right? And I think part of the problem has been the kind of great power politics that you've also identified, whether institutionally through the UN Security Council or through just the way in which the power structure works internationally, right? So as we sort of think through this non-defense possibilities, I think I also want us to take a moment to think about our own complicity in conflict continuation or persistence, from the various positions that we have represented here today. The complicity of governments and state actors, the complicity of journalism and the media, the complicity of academics in creating a situation where we also contribute to A, systems justification, and B, absolving blame. I guess we can go in the reverse order. Dominique, get us started.
I'm not really sure about the response of this. I think we need more dialogue and cooperation among different countries. This is to compensate for the difference in the powers of every country, because if we continue to do like what we're doing right now, small states are always the victims. But it depends also on the people of the countries who should be aware of what's happening first and putting pressure to the government. They should be aware of what's happening first. And then the education system, the social system and culture for the people not to accept such a situation, that would be a good idea to advance. I'm talking about the reduction of systemic vulnerabilities for small states to mitigate the risks. This is, for example, like what we do now at CGS with this conversation. We exchange ideas and help each other on dealing with this problem. For now on, that's only what I think about.
No, I'm thinking about your question. As a media perspective, I would say that in Europe, the United States, the two places that I know the most about, there is certainly a challenge with the media. A lot of international bureaus are closing down. Matter of fact, in the United States, with the new administration, the Voice of America, which I heard was also very popular in Bangladesh, has been completely shut down. I was very sorry to hear that. And so instead of not just headlines, or as we say, the scroll headlines, investigative journalism, in-depth documentaries, things that we can really spend time delving into these conflicts. It takes time, it takes resources, it takes energy. We need to invest more into that. And I will say one thing, even though I'm not a German person, I'm very proud about the Deutsche Welle. If you go online and look at some of the documentaries that they've done, including on Sudan, including on, there was one I saw about Cyprus with the Turkish and Greek perspectives. These are really fantastic documentaries that try to give a balanced approach on both of the issues of the conflict. And of course, in conflict, there are two sides to every story there, and you have to find the common ground, I think, to try to resolve that. These are fantastic things, but that Deutsche Welle has a luxury. They have very large budgets for these documentary films, and the results are also, they are fantastic and very informative. So in that sense, I would say with the media, certainly more money and energy towards investigative, qualitative journalism. The other side, newspapers, The Economist, for example, are fantastic. I don't see many people under 40 with an Economist running around in their hand, but for those people that do take the time to read cover to cover, I still do that actually. It takes a good 8 or 9 hours. That's also in-depth journalism, but to try to maybe condense those kind of formats to something that, especially Gen Z, for me that's 35 and under, can also start to get a better understanding of what these conflicts would be, is a challenge, but something that could be doable. And I think we have to think outside of the box. I know that in Hamburg, for a lot of events, we have influencers that come, and I say, who do you work for? And they say, I work for myself. I have 200,000 followers, but when they go in, whether it's a play or a concert or a political event, people are engaging with that. So that's also something that we have to take very seriously, the rapidly changing landscape of the media. One thing I will say, though, you have to be careful. When you talk to young people, sometimes they don't know anymore who the resources or their sources are. So I asked somebody, you know, you're getting all this news from RT. And they said, yeah, RT, isn't it fantastic? I don't know, from America or someplace? I said, no, that's Russia Today. Actually, a news organization that's funded by Russia. And if you look into it, I would say very, very pro-Russian on many of its stories. So also to make sure that people know where they're getting their news from is also a very important task.
Navine, you mentioned something extremely important, this non-military measures in terms of problem solving. Unfortunately today, first of all, let me tell you, more spending on military does not mean bringing more security. And today, I'm afraid that most of our approach to problem solving has been hijacked by the military-industrial complex. So more weapons, more selling weapons, more militarizations. So more militarization for what? But we will do all the stocks of the military. I know this is a question perhaps Minister can respond most probably because, but this is one issue. Whether we approach, the approach to conflict resolution or any crisis should be through precaution, which means, it is better if we can solve before it gets bigger. But today we prefer it gets bigger first, then we talk about it, then we solve through military means. For example, we have seen this after 9/11, we have seen the war on terror, led by United States, rightfully, and all the countries aligned with it. What was the cost for the United States? It is literally militarization of the American foreign policy. That you start seeing everything through military means. And Trump is taking to a NATO level now, that each country should spend 5% of their GDP in military spending. For what? Only Spain said, I don't want to spend it. All the countries agreed. But that's why I'm saying this, the military-industrial complex should not hijack our understanding of the global conflicts and our conflict resolution as well. That is one danger we face, and that's a cycle. Once we enter, we may not end up unless we spend all the stocks of the military, which is a big war, either regionally or differently. So that is the danger I see.
Thank you for these. I think we can shift to a slightly related but also different kind of a platform in thinking about democracy, because in this entire space, I think what we've seen also, with conflict and militarization, a significant degree of democratic backsliding, which also informs some of these other issues that we've been talking about, like freedom of the press, like how we get information, whether people are actually informed about what governments do, can people actually hold governments accountable, does the government itself know what's going on in order to do the work that it needs to do and be a responsive government, right? And in this space, David, you mentioned how the digital space has been useful. I think the point you make about influencers is quite interesting. This is a global phenomenon, right? That there's traditional media and now there's new media, and then there are all these influencers and so on who also offer news and analysis and narratives and so on, right? Where we need to be able to sift through this information, but at the same time, this in a way becomes, in a time of democratic backsliding, a digital democratic space, right? I think I want you to kind of address how this democratic digital space can actually be something that's productive when contradictorily it is also a space that is heavily monitored and part of the surveillance state also, right? The very space that you think is giving you voice is also the space that can get you to jail, right? Mehmet, I'll let you take the lead.
The cyber issue in terms of digital, it's a very difficult issue. It's inevitable that the states will know. I think now, let me start with this. COVID experience taught us one thing, that self-sustainability of a state is much more important than the regime itself, whether democracy or whatever you call it. That was a lesson that all the states drawn from COVID experience, because most of the countries, they left alone. All the alliance concept has been destroyed. We have seen that. We get the vaccine late and everything. Perhaps, talking about democracy and everything, that's good, that's excellent. But rather, I talk about as we entered in the populist era now, perhaps it will continue another decade. I suggest rather a constructive stability that we should have in our countries. Constructive stability. Stability means without conflict, and constructive means, at least not thinking negatively of whoever rules the country. That is what we need, perhaps. That has been the basic now. Asking democracy could be too much sometimes. Given the circumstance, because nobody's supporting that. And in media, everything is... And also, on some issues, I suggest constructive silence. Talking about too much on some issues. Yes, we know the problem. There is always problem in many places. But the values that has been taught through the West for many years has no longer support in anywhere. I don't want to enter debate whether the democracy is shifting or transforming. That's another debate. But perhaps each country will have its own way of constructive stability. That's what I call, for the lack of a better terminology. It's the same for the digital space, same for the, is those relations between governed and the governors, between the rulers and ruled ones. We need a new type of relations that will have some compromise, but they should be constructive. The way ideal as we define democracy and otherwise, I'm not really sure, whether we will get back to that discussion again, as our form of understanding has drastically shift and transformed and changed. Unfortunately, that is the case. And given all the concepts and everything, there is a mistrust in elite in each country. There is a lack of trust in status quo in each country. This creating more turbulence. But one thing also with regard to in coming years, we will have more turbulence and more problem. I understand that as someone who is teaching at National Defense University, the role of security sector will increase in coming years, everywhere. Also, we see the global erosion of the middle class, everywhere. From Asia to Middle East to Africa to everywhere. With the erosion of the middle class, we will see more protests and social demands, and then we will see more security involvement. So can we create a balance between social demands and the needs for security, that security sector involvement? That is the challenge that we will be facing. And when I teach at, our future generals in Turkey, I try to make them aware of this. I try to open their mind that, when they involve in any case, in anywhere, they should have a wider perspective rather than only military perspective. That's what I can do. That's what I believe that's the way I can contribute positively for the future generations of generals who will be taking responsibility of this one.
I can just add maybe something, you're okay. A small thing to that. Consequences. When I think about in the world, if you want to drive a car, you have to go somewhere, you have to register, you get a driver's license, and when you drive your car, you usually have some kind of identification, a license plate, so that if something happens, they know where to find you and who's responsible. The digital world these days is the wild, wild west. People can get domains, people can hide under certain identities, whether it is state-sponsored or private organizations. There's so much information. Not all of it, but some of it is fake news, disinformation, misinformation, and I think that it's certainly not easy, but we have to get some kind of consequential actions there if people go out there and spread this kind of misinformation and disinformation. I think it's a radical idea, probably not possible, but in some countries, if you want to get a domain name, that you have to go somewhere to register so that at some point people know who's putting the information out there. There's a way to at least have some kind of compliance to what you're putting out there. But I fear that the genie is out of the bottle now. It's too easy. And as I go back to it, we're living in a scroll society, a scroll generation, so that people get their information quickly and then forget their information quickly as well. And that's a very, very big challenge. This is something probably we had to talk about 10 years ago, but as we know with artificial intelligence, the technology is moving much, much faster than even the people developing it can program or look at the consequences. So more consequences to what's going on in the digital world, better ways to identify it, better ways to have some kind of structure and consequence. It is not an easy task, and I don't know if it's even a possible task, but that would be my wish.
Okay, when we talk about democracy, I want to go back to what democracy really is. What we studied in school is that it's a government by the people, for the people. But are the people aware of their rights, or what they can do? Because talking about the recent Gen Z protest, they were just talking about the symptoms. They are not satisfied with this and that, and then it was hijacked by politicians and the military at last. And now there is no politician or elite in the driving seat. And that is very dangerous, because and it just was in the capital city, because information was not spread. So when we talk about democracy, when we talk about fraud elections and manipulation of the votes and something like this, I think the first solution is the education of the population, especially the youth, who make 60% of the population. They don't even have the voice during elections. only the elders go to vote. Whereas there should be the next beneficiaries of the decision taken during the elections. And I think that it should be the basis of this. And that's a long, long way to go. So,
So we will just do one quick round now, and then we'll open up the floor to questions. So the last round is, do we ever really forget? Coming back to the theme, memory and amnesia, why the world keeps repeating its crises. Do we ever really forget? Sir?
I don't know if you forget, but I think that during the change of government, only the actors change. They repeat the same thing. And even worse sometimes. When you are not in the driving seat, you can talk. But when you are there, you change, your mind changes. And that's why I wonder why is this like that. I was in government for only 2 years, and I was fed up of what was going on. Why? Because most of the time, we did not try to deal with the real problem of the country, but just of the interests of the decision makers who is in power. And during the election campaigns, the problem in my country is that the financing is not limited. So the oligarch who is financing the election is giving order. He gives orders to the elected people during the mandate. So that's why I'm talking about the importance of educating people about their rights and their citizenship.
I would say that maybe it's not that we forget certain things, but we don't prioritize them as much. If I look at the example in Germany, I've been there now for 14 years, and often every November 9th, we cover the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, which really symbolizes the end of communism. And when I interview or talk to people who are, let's say, over 40, 45, 50, they get emotional about it. They say it was a game changer, especially East Germans who say we could finally travel around the world. We had freedoms. The world was open to us. When I talk to younger generations or even students, they say, yeah, it's part of history, interesting, really doesn't affect us, but it's a day off. We can celebrate a little bit and move on. So maybe that's part of our survival instinct with that. But on many things, I would say it's not forgetting, it's a different priority. I was lucky enough to learn a lot the last few days about the history of Bangladesh. And when I talk to older people, 1971 is a very important year. Yeah, the independence war, a brutal war, and they're very proud to have this independent country. For the younger generation, they know about it, but I think they didn't live it. Thank God they didn't have war. We can be thankful for that. But it probably also doesn't have the same significance as someone who experienced that. So maybe that's part of human nature, not to forget, but certainly also not to prioritize if you haven't lived it or it hasn't affected you personally.
We should not forget. That's important. Sometimes we can neglect, we can underestimate, we can undervalue something, but we should never forget. Otherwise, we will not have a memory. Identity is sort of constructed through memory, experience, history, whatever you call it. Otherwise, we will lose, if you forget, we will lose our perspective towards the future. That's why states have responsibility to educate the new generations about the past, about history, so they will not forget. Perhaps they may not understand as the first generation understand, but they should value it. So that's the responsibility, I think. Otherwise, we can lose our directions. As a state, this is the case. So I don't believe there is forgetting, and states has responsibility, make sure that things are important, should not be forgotten in history.
And education plays a part.
Through education, of course. Through education, social media, or whatever you call it, TVs or whatever.
I think we have a consensus there. I think you've all mentioned education, and I think that's something that we cannot actually ignore. The floor is now open for questions. There's a microphone in the middle over there. If you would please take the effort to take a few steps towards the mic.
Thank you. I'm Nishatanjum Shavanti. I'm Research Associate at GRM Consulting Service. So I have two questions. You were talking about algorithm, information junks. So we are living in an echo chamber of algorithm. Information are like junk food. So now decide what Gen Z sees, Gen Z believes and mobilize around. How do we disrupt a system where misinformation is not accidental but engineered for engagement? And the second one, you are talking about targeted sympathy, media attention. So peace fails when memory becomes a narrative battleground. How can nations build shared memories in deeply polarized context with Western academic dominance? Thank you.
Who would like to take this?
Algorithm first?
Okay.
Yes, thank you for the question. I'll take the first one if that's okay with algorithms. It is a good question, and there's no easy answer to it. Because these companies, especially social media companies, they make their money two ways. One, the longer you spend on their apps, the more money they get, and of course through commercials. And the people want commercials with more eyes looking onto this. So with the algorithms, regulation is the answer. There's only a few, for example, in the United States, we're talking 3 or 4 big companies, well, you know, whether it be Apple, Yahoo, Google, that we sit down and say you have to regulate that. But most people, including myself, don't know how these algorithms are made, how they're produced, how they're used. So there's a big problem because we have also in the political world people that are not really familiar with the technology that's going on there. Regulation would be, I think, one of the biggest things to work on. And number 2, with the algorithms, it's not only just with consumption. I mean, you know, it sees that you like to buy these T-shirts, so it gives you more algorithms towards that. It's skewing the way we think. As I said, I talked to some Republicans in the United States who think that Donald Trump was the best president ever from the United States. I say, okay, tell me why. And they go through the lists and they show me the feeds on their algorithms. And of course, if you only have one side of one debate, you're almost brainwashed. And so I would say that this algorithm question could actually be a threat to democracy if we don't get a handle to it. How we solve it, I don't know, but there are a few tech firms, mostly in the United States, they have to do it. And if we don't do it now, I'm worried that in the future the problem will get worse and that we will have people going into so-called rabbit holes where they can't think outside of that, and it'll be a big danger. That's the one on the algorithm. The second one, if anyone would like to answer.
In non-Western countries, I focus on that. We have a problem of social consolidation. In my country, let me give an example. In Turkey, for example, there are 4 major political parties. If you bring one representative from each of them, if they come here, they speak about Turkey. If you have no idea about Turkey, you will think they are all talking about the different countries. So the issue of social consolidation is drying out us. That's why our politics has become a strategic choice rather than a tactical competition. In the West, they had lots of wars and different things. They sort of consolidated society. Now they are coming back again, as we see in the United States, slowly still. But if you have a social consolidations, then competitions, politics, and all, even memory, even history, become a tactical space to compete. But we lost our directions. The lack of social consolidations shows a deep crisis, what we want. Today I was having a conversation in here with someone about potential Bangladesh foreign policy. And I asked him, what does Bangladesh want from the world? How does Bangladesh define itself? So based on that, Bangladesh can have a foreign policy. So if we don't know how to define ourselves, if we don't know how to define our priorities, we cannot have a foreign policy. We can collect the miles, we can exchange conversations, we can visit, but what do we want? I think this is the question for most of the non-Western countries. That question is coming to the West as well, both in Europe and the United States. So Trump is defining differently now. Trump says, I don't want to give anyone security. He says, everybody should pay for it. So, he said, I don't want to give security exchange of influence. He said, if I want influence, I can buy it. So he's shifting whole systemic paradigm differently. and they are coming back. So the issues for us, I mean, in the history writing, that's why we cannot create big narratives. If we don't have big narratives, we cannot give projections to generations. Sometimes big narratives can be some false narratives. That's fine, as long as it is convincing to people and giving a vision to look at the future. But that is the challenge: social consolidation, big narrative, and shifting things from strategic competition to tactical competition. If we can overcome these issues, I guarantee, we have everything for, labor force, we have enough intelligent people, we have enough resources, everything we have. But we dry out our energy in these things. And as the global politics is shifting to everywhere and transforming, yet there is nothing new, can we overcome these issues? What percentage of the issues that we agree? If we can make agreement over 50%, I can see there is a progress. But if it is less than 50%, which means social consolidation is there. And with these disinformations and all those manipulations, this social consolidation is becoming a generational. We have now a generational consolidation problem. Gen Z, Gen different. So that's another challenge. So we are divided. We are getting divided more. So I think we need big narratives and how we define, how we look at the outside, how relations with others. Then probably we can at least turn down those questions.
And I'll add one other thing. I'm really skeptical about the COPs that they just had in Brazil and fighting climate change, because it is a very serious issue. Also here in Bangladesh, very well felt with floods, earthquakes, and everything else. And yet to really solve this problem, we need the whole world to truly come together to save ourselves. And so a lot of these other regional conflicts, I don't belittle them, but at some point we will have to get past them to get to some of the bigger ones that will affect all of us, regardless of our race, sex, religion, traditions, and that is the survival of us as a human species and our future generations. And I hope that we can all reach that. So in my heart, I always say, first I am a human, and then the rest, and the rest, the rest. And if we get to that level, maybe that will also help us resolve some of the important regional and geopolitical conflicts that we have around the world. This is my own wish.
Hello, this is Nahid Hassanimon, coordinator of Youth in Hunger Bangladesh. So I have just a basic question: why the world keeps repeating its crisis? Because are these crises being repeated because an institution or state responds to symptoms like tear gases or blockades or protests or sanctions, but keep avoiding the core region like structural causes, inequalities, injustice, and explosion, which were one of the core regions of our July uprising 2024. So what do you think about that? Thank you.
Yes, after a conflict, most of the time there is negotiation. A conflict ends with a table and dialogue around the table. But sometimes people forget to address the real underlying causes of the conflict. They address just the symptoms. And because of maybe they are in a rush to settle the dispute, they don't go deep in the underlying causes. You're talking about inequity and the others. And the other thing is inclusivity. You should include everybody during the negotiation time. No one should be left behind, even small minority, because if not, this is the starting point of a new crisis. It's just a matter of time. So this is not about forgetting, but in the methodology that you use in resolving the dispute. And that is very important. And you cannot do that unless there is an open society when everybody can speak out and talk about his own interest or whatever.
That's what I think about it.
As long as we have people, we'll have problem. I think problems are always same, but the nature and the complexities change. You know, humans are greedy. It has been always the case. Everybody has different insecurity issues, you know, in the past and here. So I think it does not change. But let me finish by a phrase, you know, General is here, but General, I will use some military terminology here, if you allow me. Pass everyone, but leave no one behind. But in here, what we do, we pass everyone, but we pass everyone, but we leave everyone behind. That's the problem. I mean, we should get military mentality that pass everyone and leave no one behind, and take it with you.
Anyone else?
My name is Muhammad Arifuzzaman. I'm working as a teacher at School of Education, Bangladesh Open University. Actually, in my opinion, we never forget. Actually, we enjoy it. We all know the history of, you know, even we enjoy it in so many ways. For example, the emergence of Ottoman Empire. My family, my wife is sitting over there. Every night we enjoy the Artugul and Ghazi, something, you know, the emergence of Ottoman Empire. So many episodes. So that is emergence of Ottoman Empire and Genghis Khan, Germany, Japan, and the Second World War. Definitely our Nelson Mandela and the racism. So we all know this history and we all read this with passion. So before my question, I would like to add something, that is the confrontation of man's own inventions and manipulations, as well as the violent effect of the man's acquired knowledge of nature with the destruction of natural environment, have reached such a degree that many people in the modern age, we are now beginning to question the validity of the conception of man held since the rise of the modern civilization. Modern man is trying to gain domination over natural environment by the use of technological power, while remaining completely ignorant of the latent spiritual capacity of the soul, big soul, I mean the big gap between the big S and the small s. So my question is straight to Professor Navine Murshid, please. And if you'd like to, you can transfer to other speakers as well. What is the cause of decadence of the humanity, according to you? I mean, not only in the area of battlefield or genocide like Gaza, but also across the world. And how can we regain the latent spiritual capacity of our soul to make the only livable planet peaceful? Or to put it more simply, if Malaysia can make it, why can't we? If we can, how long will it take to make Bangladesh a peaceful country? As we know, the 1971, 1975, 1990, even 2024. So how many revolutions do we need to wake up from this amnesia? You know, I'm sorry if I take a long time. Thank you very much.
No, this is a very complicated question. You know, this is philosophical. It's also sort of practical. But I think this I cannot answer in like a minute or two. But I think what I will say that there is something to be said about conspicuous consumption, right? I think if that's how we are thinking about decadence and how this strive to consume more and more, this interest in always focusing on capital accumulation, the sort of capitalist drive that apparently incentivizes the entire world. I think there's something to be said about its limitations, right? That we want to say that capitalism leads to innovation. It gives us the promise of a better life, and to a certain degree, I think it has held out. We do have higher GDP per capita now than we've had ever in the past. You know, we are in a world now where we have enough wealth to feed the entire world. We do not actually need people to be homeless because there's enough homes in the world to home the entire world, right? So, you know, we are at that point in global history where we don't actually have to live with scarcity, and yet we do. Right? And I think that's where I see your question heading, that, you know, at one point there is this thing about decadence, right? Do we need wealth? Do we need to grow? Yes, we do, because we need to solve some of these problems of scarcity. But now that we are there, we see that we are encountering this kind of a question, right? A question of spirituality, a crisis of morality, that we know that the wealth that we have today, these are a product of structurally enforced rules and regulations, right? It's a world that is structurally divided into winners and losers, right? And yet we want to say that, no, this is my own hard work, this is my own personal innovation, my personal growth that has given me this wealth, and so I'm going to hoard, I'm going to keep it all to myself, I will not share it with others, right? And I think that's where the crisis of spirituality and also dishonesty sort of comes in, that inability to recognize that there is this structural force that has created these kinds of wealth gaps in the first place. We have always known, you know, even theoretically, that the capitalist model is one that produces this kind of inequality, right? And we chose it as something that, okay, here's the necessary evil that we need, the bitter pill that we need to take in order to create a certain level of wealth that can get us to self-sufficiency, right? And then, you know, here we are in this spiraling context. You know, we were talking about this space of controlled militarism. And yet we know that we are probably closer to Frankenstein's monster than we've ever been, right? That because things actually don't remain manageable. We don't actually follow economic models or even maybe philosophical models very well, right? And so there is that kind of crisis too, right? The crisis is not just of, you know, here is a war, here is a protest, like the minister was saying here. As you know, there are these root causes, right? That connect us with the structural reasons to those that are actually quite individual, right? And how at the individual level we are also complicit in this system, right? That goes on. That there has had been this sort of a buy-in, which gets us to sort of thinking about the problems of democracy and so on. And again, you know, this is a long conversation, right? I don't think we really have time for this. How do we move out of it? I don't think you know, if there's another consensus. I mean, why do we keep repeating? We keep repeating because there's no incentive to actually ever stop, right? Because in this world where we are always trying to accumulate more, we have actually, you know, you were talking about the military-industrial complex, that it's beneficial, it's profitable to use your military, to get into wars, to sell your weapons and so on, right? And so that again is the sort of capitalist logic. You commodify everything and we get this kind of a world. I think that's an inevitability. So I think, you know, it's a little bit of a doom and gloom, right? But I think, you know, there are these sort of ways in which we can sort of think about, are there processes that we see at play of forgetting, right? And I think some of the larger questions that we were having today about institutions, about memory making, about how conflicts persist, about the role of global powers, we sort of see how memory making is also something that's constructed, right? And so, you know, we never really forget, but then, you know, there are all kinds of influences who want us to remember selectively. Let's do a round of last thoughts.
Let's do a round of thoughts. You sure? I mean, the one thought I would say, your question is very thought-provoking and very philosophical. If there's one thing that's been constant throughout humanity in the last hundreds, if not thousands of years, it's warfare. And I wonder really if that's part of the human nature, is this conflict. And my university...
David, new bottle of a can of worms, getting into human nature here.
But when I was at in my university in the United States, in Washington and Georgetown, one of the professors, I'll never forget, he said to us, in 1903, the first manned flight, the Wright brothers, after hundreds of years, people were able to fly. Incredible. It was a dream that people had dreamed about for thousands of years. 1903. 1914, we had World War I. It took all of 11 years for people to say, wait a minute, we can use this airplane for the military. Aha, we had the Air Force. And so, you know, if you want to go now to 2025, when I talk to people in militaries about what artificial intelligence will do and how much control or lack of control we humans will have about it, it'll blow your mind. But I just want to say, on a philosophical note, I really wonder, you know, is conflict, is war part of human nature? I'm a big, I like to watch the Animal Planet shows and see how, you know, how animals, when they come together, fight for their territories, fight for their mates. It's always warfare. Exactly, and I wonder if that is part of it. And the other one, my wife would probably argue, it's more male-dominated than females. And that's also another discussion, which we can leave for another time, but that's maybe also, if we were to have more female leaders, if that would also play a role in some of the conflict resolutions. That's my closing statement.
For the future generation, I mean, you are a teacher, so instead of promising them a better or heaven or whatever, I think we should teach them how to be resilient. More crises will come, and the nature of the crisis will change, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, but we should be resilient. That is the biggest thing that we should teach to next generation, Gen Z or other generation or coming generation. That will save us. Otherwise, I mean, that will be difficult.
Okay, I think we can't get rid of conflict. Conflict is part of human nature. This is because of the evolving needs of humanity. If you can look at the Abraham Maslow hierarchy of needs, I don't know in your country, but in my country, whenever we start having a good economic situation, there is a conflict. Because there are new ambitions for each category of people. And this is why those evolving needs are just accelerated in space and time by technology and globalization. You see, the crises are closer and closer, not 100 years like in the past. And because of new needs, but depleted resources. Limited resources versus unlimited needs. And also compounded by a poor distribution of assets, which leads to inequality. So all of this is a cycle, but the best thing is how to mitigate it, how to manage it. I think that's what you need to do, or how to find the solution to do that. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, all of you. I think, you know, as a sort of a parting thing, I think I do this exercise with my students sometimes, right? To ask that if there's a bowl of candy here, and you can take as much as you want, how many would you take? How many would you take? All of it? We'll take the full bowl. And so, and I think here's the connection to human nature, right? When is it that you will take the full bowl? When you know that this is all you get, right? If you know that there's going to be this bowl of candy every single day, then you'll just take what you need, right? And so you're not going to take the full bowl, right? And so it's not human nature to just hoard. It's not human nature to just beat each other up in order to get it. It's human nature to self-preserve, yes. To survive, yes. But if you know that you can survive because there is this
abundance at this point, then you're not going to have to do that, right? And so there is that interlink, right? That human nature is not something that's constant. It's conditional upon your circumstances, your economic circumstances, your social circumstances, and a sense of security and stability and so on, which is why, we have this entire conversation about the role of the government, about abundance, about capital accumulation, redistribution, like we were talking about, right? And so in the hope of us ending on a more positive note, I'd like to say that, it has to be more than human nature, because if it is human nature, then we are all doomed, right? Because then we'll just be killing one another, and then we might as well just say goodbye, right? Because, we have to be able to say that, that we behave differently in a different, more egalitarian space, right? On that more positive note, please have a good night.
I was talking with him, just one word. Just look at the queue at the buffet during lunch because of uncertainty. This is one example of how people behave in face of limited resources. Thank you.